Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. America's disastrous war in the Middle East is now in its sixth month. Its economy is in a tailspin, and Donald Trump is in a rage because his ballroom has been put on hold. Remember, this is what Donald Trump wanted and promised, a 90,000 square foot white and gold behemoth that would dwarf the actual White House. It would be the biggest thing on that plot of land by far. This is what Donald Trump has given you. A gaping hole in the heart of the country. He posted this photo this week. Look at that. He's proud of that. He is proud of demolishing the East Wing without asking any of our permission or Congress, to build a Trump monstrosity, to build a ego palace for himself. But today, a federal appeals court ruled 2-1. No, buddy. That actually, he is supposed to ask permission.
The Supreme Court chamber fell into a tense silence as the justices confronted a set of filings that immediately placed Donald Trump under intense public and institutional pressure. What had been framed as a routine argument over procedural questions exploded into a full-scale examination of election interference claims that no one in the room could ignore. The documents, the oral arguments, and the pointed questions from the bench combined to create a moment that left the former president's legal position exposed and his public narrative under direct fire. The core of the hearing centered on newly highlighted evidence and legal arguments alleging coordinated efforts to challenge or alter the certification of electoral votes in ways that crossed established legal boundaries. Counsel for the parties laid out timelines, communications, and official actions that the court was now being asked to weigh. The claims were not abstract. They involved specific actors, specific dates, and specific attempts to pressure state officials and federal processes in the aftermath of a national election. From the opening minutes, the atmosphere...
Military and Secret Service are viewing this horrendous, politically motivated, and unlawful ruling as a national security threat to our nation, in that the entire complex is being built for the protection of our country and additionally all future presidents. It is all tied together as one big, expensive, and very complex unit, which is vital for national security and military operations of the United States of America. This unjust decision must be overturned by the Supreme Court in its entirety. I didn't read the whole thing, just so you know. Notice as soon as they strike it down, it's like the national security military complex and not the ballroom. Like, it was the ballroom. He called it the ballroom. He talked about how there had to be a ballroom. That was the project. Now it's like the military complex. So forget about Iran, where we are still at war. There's still no deal. Forget about the price of gas, which is still above $4 a gallon, has been for months. If you want to know what the president of the United States spends all of his time thinking about as president, it's clear as day. This is it. I mean, it's obvious if you watch him, but do not take my word for it. Here is the reporter who may know Trump better than any others, Maggie Haberman of the New York Times.
How much of his time actually goes into the renovation now?
A lot. If you looked at like a chart of his mind share, like this I will say about getting into his mind, like 70% of it would be on his renovations. It's a legacy thing, but it's I always think of legacy with him different than the way we usually use the word legacy. It's not what am I leaving behind for the world. It's what am I leaving behind so the world can't kick me off the world.
Trump cannot see anything beyond these projects to glorify him. The ballroom, there was the reflecting pool, there's the arch, which he's still like raising money from God knows who and in God knows which way. There's the Trump coins and the Trump passports and the statues he's gilding everywhere and all of this weird nonsense. The man wants to be surrounded by his gold leaf landlord special decor everywhere he goes. Even today, sitting in a White House press conference for the mining industry, behind a table with a sign reading, American mining, American jobs, right? Clearly set up by his political minders who were like, you have to talk about things ostensibly about the American people. All he wanted to do was talk about renovating.
I'm liking the chandeliers. I like those Corinthian columns, but I don't know, cutting them out would be not good. Those are beautiful columns. But I'm allowed to do it. Every once in a while, I'll come in here and grab a painting and put it at the Oval Office, right?
He can't help himself. He cannot help himself. And again, this all would be funny if he wasn't the president of the United States and there wasn't a war going on. But at least there's nothing else going on today the president should be focusing on, right?
Minus 23,000. No rebound for the July jobs report. Negative 23,000. Again, a disappointing jobs report.
23,000 jobs lost in July.
It's so bad that even the folks at Fox cannot find a way to spin it. Yes, we lost a ton of jobs last month, but that actually isn't even the worst news because economists expected a gain of 83,000 jobs in July. Instead, we lost 23,000, 100,000 job miss. And this report also revised May and June job numbers down by 103,000. And yet unemployment ticked down, which is a sure sign that more people are just dropping out of the labor market entirely instead of seeking new jobs. In fact, according to this chart by our friend, the economist Justin Wolfers, the only job sectors that have grown since Trump took office, and this is ironic when you think about the macho man appeal of Donald Trump, right? We're going to get back to mining and we're going to build stuff and manufacturing. The only thing that has grown is healthcare and social services. That's it. That's where all the jobs are. The rest of the U.S. economy has cut more than 350,000 jobs. Now, those are numbers that will concern most presidents going into a midterm election. But concerned is not how Donald Trump rolls. He's unbothered as he sat down today with Punchbowl co-founder and MS Now political contributor Jake Sherman.
Well, a lot of people are saying I'm one of the greatest presidents ever, but our country right now is doing better than it's ever done. You know, when I see polls on the economy, I should have 150%, not 100%.
Fear was charged. Justices pressed both sides on the factual record. One line of questioning focused on whether certain public statements and private communications demonstrated a knowing effort to obstruct the lawful counting of electoral votes. Another probed the legal consequences of those actions under existing statutes governing interference with official proceedings. The answers given by Trump's legal team repeatedly ran into the same problem. The contemporaneous record did not cleanly support the sweeping denials that had been offered in public for years. The bombshell quality of the hearing came from the way the claims were framed for the court. This was not a political rally or a cable news debate. It was a formal proceeding in which every assertion had to withstand judicial scrutiny. When the justices asked for the strongest evidence supporting the interference allegations, the responding counsel pointed to a combination of public remarks, internal messages, and the...
I can get laid off tomorrow, then I'm pretty much homeless. Because, you can't save now.
No, I'm good on Trump, man. That's all I got to say.
What does it feel like to be living in these conditions right now, in these economic conditions right now?
Hurt. Very hurt. I try to do... Sorry, I cried. I try to do a lot for my kids, and I can't do much.
If you could send a message to the president right now, what would you tell him?
He needs to look out for the American people instead of himself. Put us first.
Does America feel great again?
No. Not at all.
Sam Stein is the managing editor of The Bulwark and an MS Now contributor. Valencia Johnson is a Democratic strategist who worked as a senior advisor to the 2020 Biden campaign, and they both join me now. Sam, as I watched that tape, I was thinking that Alex Tabbitt should have said to them, but what about the ballroom? Aren't you psyched about the ballroom? Isn't that, what about that? What if we build that ballroom? Wouldn't that, and we put in Corinthian columns, wouldn't that make you happier?
Yeah, they might not go for the Corinthian columns. That might not be the choice. That was kind of like a really heartbreaking video, and it really got to the dichotomy of what's happening here. The obsession with the ballroom and all these beautification projects, it's clearly something that he loves to do. It's where his attention is, as Maggie noted. And it comes at this obvious political cost, because if you're just an average political observer, you're watching the president just spend all his time and day and energy doing these renovation projects. The ballroom, it's totally absurd, right? I mean, of all the things that he's done, obviously he's done more pernicious and damaging things, more hurtful things, more unethical things. Although I will say, one of the elements of the ballroom that's really underappreciated is how unethical it is, right? Who is funding the actual private stream of donations? We just don't know. But putting that aside, if you just step back and you think about what he did, he literally demolished a third of the White House complex without saying he was going to do it, getting permission to do it. In fact, his first inclination was he was going to leave the East Wing intact. And now he's like, well, can't I just go ahead and do it when the courts step in? And it's symbolic of a president who is distracted, who's egotistical, who is focused in all the wrong directions, and who's probably going to pay at the polls for it.
Yeah, this line from the ruling. I mean, I keep thinking about this idea. I mean, sort of a jokey idea, but like if you were renting a house that had a garage, and you were just like, I'm going to demo the garage. I'm going to build something here.
Yeah, see it.
The landlord shows up like, no, you can't do that. Like, this is the ruling says the whole thing has nothing at all to do whether the proposed ballroom is desirable or not as a matter of policy. At this preliminary stage, the National Trust has shown compellingly, Congress has not ceded unfettered authority to the executive to radically redesign, reshape, and reconstruct the White House, the People's House, to fit a particular president's desires. Like, it isn't his house, it's ours. And Alencia, on the jobs part and also the price part, when you watch that tape that Alex Tabbitt put together, which was great, I got to think about Biden people that were in that administration, who could not really control the fact that inflation was going up. There were external things that did it. There was not a ton the president could do about it. Having that be the signature issue of that election, and now turning around and watching all this play out and how you feel about it.
Yeah, it is extremely heartbreaking to watch that video, to hear the pain in those people's voices. I have family members who actually help with people who are unhoused, who are losing their jobs. They actually need food assistance, and it is very real. And I remember during the Biden administration, there were a lot of conversations on Democratic circles, and that we actually have to do a better job of communicating how these policies would actually take a little bit of time, right? Like President Biden passed some very strong, economic bills, but it would take a long time for people to actually feel that. So how do you communicate this while also really talking about the dangers of the incoming Trump administration?
Sequence of official pressure campaigns directed at state legislatures and election officials. The pattern, they argued, showed more than political disagreement. It showed a sustained effort to overturn certified results through extra-legal means. Trump's legal representatives pushed back hard. They insisted the actions were protected political speech, that the challenges were legitimate efforts to ensure election integrity, and that no criminal intent could be fairly inferred. The justices did not accept the framing at face value. Repeated questions returned to the gap between the public claims of fraud and the absence of evidence sufficient to change certified outcomes in any court of law. The contrast was stark. On one side stood years of public assertions. On the other stood the documented failure of those assertions when tested in dozens of state and federal proceedings. The pressure on Trump intensified as the hearing progressed. Every time counsel attempted to reframe the events as ordinary political advocacy, a justice returned to the specific actions taken after the election had already been called and certified by
22 or 24. And so the 2020 election was, in fact, the results as we, the American public. I'm still researching, so let me. This is the first. But there's no intelligence.
Not yet. He's got to go.
There is no intelligence that the election would have said that Donald Trump was president.
The president said that tonight.
It is the narrative version of the Titanic hitting the iceberg. It's Donald Trump's own election conspiracy guy, John Solomon, who can't even pretend that his investigation into the 2020 election turned up the claims of election fraud that Donald Trump said they did, that he was desperately seeking. That was the night of his national address. It is part of a pattern now, an embarrassing pattern of incompetence from the Trump administration to find something that they try to market as a gotcha, a bombshell, declassified memo that either wittingly or unwittingly proves something else, usually the opposite. The latest example of that pattern goes back to the very beginning of Trump's first year in office the first time, and his push still now, 10 years later, to rewrite the history of the Russia investigation into his campaign. The New York Times reports this, quote, in recent weeks, the White House has released a trove of previously classified FBI memos that it says back up Trump's claims that a so-called deep state was out to get him, in which there is, quote, little new of substance in the documents and nothing that fundamentally undercuts the FBI's rationale for pursuing the Russia investigation. But the Times reveals that the material does do something else. It sheds new light on how an entire half of the FBI's original investigation, the part that was supposed to go back and look into Trump's ties to Russia, was effectively killed from the start by then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. From that reporting, quote, Rosenstein did not ask special counsel Robert Mueller to conduct the counterintelligence investigation into Donald Trump and made clear to Mueller that he did not want him conducting an open-ended, years-long investigation. Quote, although Rosenstein did not authorize Mueller to conduct the counterintelligence investigation, responsibility for overseeing it was transferred to the FBI agents working on Mueller's team, according to the memos released by the White House. But since the special counsel's mandate was to focus on crimes, the counterintelligence focus fell by the wayside and was limited to activities within the scope of the special counsel's jurisdiction, according to one of the memos. I want to bring in the reporter behind that story, New York Times investigative journalist Mike Schmidt. Director Brennan is still with us. Mike, just first, what did the Trump White House think the memos were going to show? And then explain how this falls through the cracks, how they end up releasing something that really points at one of the things Donald Trump has been running from for a decade.
It seems like they wanted the memos to back up the notion that the deep state was out to get Donald Trump and to further the idea that the Russia, what happened around Russia was a hoax and it was a conspiracy against Trump. And it's one that they believe so much in that there's a criminal investigation going on in Florida into it. This can easily get very confusing, so let me try and make it as basic as possible. In May of 2017, the FBI, after the Comey firing, was so concerned that Donald Trump was potentially acting at the behest of Russia that they took this extraordinary decision, a decision that I still find hard to get my head around. They opened an investigation into whether Trump was
the states. The questions focused on knowledge, intent, and the use of official channels to advance theories that had already been rejected by judges appointed by presidents of both parties. The cumulative effect was a public airing of material that Trump's team had long sought to keep at the level of political argument rather than formal legal examination. Legal analysts following the proceedings described the hearing as a pivotal stress test. When the nation's highest court examines claims of election interference, the institutional stakes rise dramatically. The court is not a political body, yet its questions and eventual rulings carry consequences that reach far beyond any single case. The fact that the justices were willing to engage the factual record in this level of detail signaled that the issues could no longer be dismissed as purely partisan theater. The public reaction was immediate. Clips of the most pointed exchanges circulated widely within minutes. Viewers saw a formal legal setting in which the long-running narrative of a stolen election was subjected to the kind of rigorous questioning it had largely avoided in the political arena. The visual of the court pressing for evidence rather than accepting assertion carried its own force. For supporters of the interference claims, the hearing was framed as an attack. For critics, it was long overdue accountability. The documents and the questions made neither framing entirely comfortable. Further details emerged as the arguments continued. Counsel referenced specific communications in which pressure was applied to state officials to reconsider certified.
Blanche will not be a backstop against any of Donald Trump's impulses and desires and insecurities that this democracy will likely need come the November midterm elections. In that lawyer's words, instead, quote, we are screwed. As concerning as the future integrity of our democracy is, of our elections, Blanche, now being the country's top law enforcement official, does put America's entire bedrock principle of the rule of law under threat, not just here, but around the world. Frequent guest on this show, Glenn Thrush, reporter in the New York Times, writes this, quote, Mr. Blanche's confirmation in the pre-dawn hours on Saturday was largely symbolic. As acting attorney general, he could have served indefinitely. But it represented a powerful endorsement by Congress of the philosophy that has guided him under a meddling, demanding boss, that he has a constitutional obligation to execute every lawful White House order, even if it shatters long-standing policy and rule of law norms or contradicts what he thinks is right. Already, we have seen Todd Blanche oversee an abundance of cases be brought against Donald Trump's perceived political enemies. Former director of the FBI, Jim Comey, has been indicted. The FBI is relitigating the 2020 election, trying to find voter fraud that Bill Barr says was bullshit and didn't exist. There's a grand conspiracy case underway in Florida going after the Obama-era intelligence officials who put together the 2016 intelligence assessment about Russia. Todd Blanche was the one in charge of the very, very botched and unlawful release of the Epstein files. He was one who sat down with an interview with Ghislaine Maxwell that immediately precedes her being moved to a low-security prison. On Friday, the Trump administration informed Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook that it will be reviving its effort to fire her. And speaking of reviving cases, over the weekend, Trump pushed again for punishing former Olympian David Hearn for vandalizing the reflecting pool, a thing that Judge Jeanine Pirro says didn't happen. It's a case that was already dismissed by her. I guess her box of evidence supporting the dismissal wasn't enough to convince Donald Trump. All of this undergirds a deeply distressing concern. What more will Todd Blanche do in service of Donald Trump now that he is confirmed as the country's Attorney General? The first test of that question looks like it was already put in motion. Here's Donald Trump this afternoon.
The anti-weaponization fund, do you think it's still alive at this point? And are there any options that you're looking at to perhaps...
Well, that'll be up to Todd Blanche. He was our new, and who will be, I think, a great Attorney General.
The dawn of a new, even more Trump-controlled and dominated Department of Justice is where we begin the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. The aforementioned New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush is here. Also joining us, Margaret Donovan. She was captain in the JAG Corps. She's a former assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Connecticut, now a visiting lecturer at Yale Law. And back with us, NYU law professor and legal analyst Melissa Murray is with us for the hour. Glenn, I saw some reporting that a memo went out asking DOJ employees to clap in Todd Blanche today, and that happened. Your thoughts on what the country's in for?
Well, I think what's interesting about it is, let's go back to the weaponization fund question, which is interesting. Donald Trump has not gotten the memo or the two memos that Blanche signed. Actually, he only signed one of them. Which were critical in getting him the 2 votes on the Senate Judiciary Committee to even get to a floor vote. So Trump keeps reviving this issue of the anti-weaponization fund. Todd Blanche has said it's dead, 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 wrote that in these memos. Here's the problem. Todd Blanche is the architect of Donald Trump's criminal defense strategy predicated on the unitary executive and the dominance of Article 2 of the Constitution. Okay.
Results. They cited the sequence of events surrounding the January certification process and the role played by outside actors who advanced theories later rejected by every relevant court. The justices asked whether those theories had been presented in good faith or whether they had been advanced despite knowledge of their legal weakness. The answers given did not fully close the gap. Trump's position was placed under fire not by political opponents alone, but by the institutional process of the Supreme Court itself. When the highest court in the country examines claims of this magnitude, the ordinary tools of political deflection lose much of their power. The record is the record. The questions are the questions. The answers must confront both. The broader implications extended well beyond the immediate case. Election integrity. Results. They cited the sequence of events surrounding the January certification process and the role played by outside actors who advanced theories later rejected by every relevant court. The justices asked whether those theories had been presented in good faith or whether they had been advanced despite knowledge of their legal weakness. The answers given did not fully close the gap. Trump's position was placed under fire not by political opponents alone, but by the institutional process of the Supreme Court itself. When the highest court in the country examines claims of this magnitude, the ordinary tools of political deflection lose much of their power. The record is the record. The questions are the questions. The answers must confront both. The broader implications extended well beyond the immediate case. Election integrity.
You think a country ruled by a dictator, that's where you see that kind of thing. And this is not the land of the free and the home of the brave that I know.
Is this a country that you know as well, or is it another one, maybe not the United States, Susan?
Look, imagine being out on your bike on a summer afternoon and stopping by the National Mall, looking at, what Donald Trump has already sort of wrought, the disruption. The cranes are all over the city, the digging, the visible signs of a man who is determined to put his personal stamp, writing it, physically across our Capitol. And then all of a sudden you're being charged with a felony because not just the president, but so many of those around him believe that his lies are more important than, the actual truth. It's a painful moment in the country. And I think that's why these stories are resonating for so many people. Eugene, I mean, it all feels like a profound challenge to what we think of as the United States. And of course, to do so while polluting the actual National Mall that's here to commemorate and memorialize and pay tribute to those very values that are being, profaned. I mean, it's just, tragedy or bad farce. And I think that's the through line here in these court opinions again and again over the last 2 years. Today's is no exception in that sense. Courts are screaming out to us and saying, these are profoundly un-American decisions. And, we have, unfortunately, ample evidence that for everyone who says, okay, this is too far for me to go, apparently including even Jeanine Pirro, the former Fox TV host who's the U.S. attorney here in D.C., there are those who are willing to follow. And that includes Trump's acting attorney general, who now seems on the brink of confirmation, his personal lawyer. Turned into the attorney general, who can bring more cases like this, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to take a page out of your book and ask you to put a little bow on this for us, because both of these cases are similar in that there are a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of money in this federal government that goes to making us all live in Donald Trump's realities.
Well, that last part is it. He is forcing us to live in his reality. As a native Washingtonian, to see what this man has done to this city is an abomination. It is abhorrent. Even in during the worst days of the riots and the protests, where people were, spraying, painting here and there, you didn't see anything like that that touched on the monuments, if you will, of the nation. You may have, a business or a shop owner may have to deal with vandals, et cetera. But there was even amongst those who were angry at the administration, angry at the country, if you will, for the war in Vietnam or the lack of civil rights or the dehumanization of women and the subjugation of their rights. They didn't take it out on the national monuments. And that's what Donald Trump is doing. His imprimatur is, I'm going to turn this into me, and there's nothing you can do about it. And to the last point, before moving on to this one, about, this reflecting pool, the situation with the East Wing, what's the court going to do? The court's going to give him what he wants. They'll find a way. They'll make the case that was made here. Well, you've already torn the building down, and you're not going to rebuild the old East Wing, and the administration doesn't have those parameters to do that. So future administrations should know they can't. But what are you going to do? So that's how Donald Trump acts. He acts
expected. Further briefing will address the precise legal standards that apply. Political actors on all sides will attempt to shape the narrative. Yet the core reality of the hearing cannot be undone. The Supreme Court examined bombshell claims of election interference in open session, and the pressure on Donald Trump that resulted was both immediate and institutional. This moment stands as a clear illustration of the difference between political argument and formal legal scrutiny. In the political arena, claims can be repeated indefinitely. In the Supreme Court, they must confront evidence, precedent, and pointed questions from the bench. Today, those claims faced that confrontation. The result was a public hearing that placed Trump under sustained fire and left the long-running narrative of the post-election period more exposed than it had been in years. The record of the proceeding is now permanent. The questions asked by the justices remain part of the public transcript. The answers given will be dissected by lawyers, historians, and the public for years to come. Whatever the eventual ruling, the hearing itself has already altered the landscape. Claims that once circulated primarily in political spaces have been subjected to the highest level of judicial
full ballroom that he is building after demolishing the historic East Wing of the White House. Trump has said many times that his ballroom will be the finest of its kind in the world. He has also said many times that the project will be fully funded by private donors and not taxpayers like you.
We didn't ask for any tax money. We have no taxes. This is taxpayer free. We have no taxpayer putting up 10 cents.
That statement, like so many things with this Trump presidency, was, of course, a lie. According to new reporting from the Washington Post, quote, the Trump administration plans to spend at least $900 million for construction projects on the White House grounds, a significantly larger price tag than has been previously reported, and one that would be covered primarily by taxpayers, according to records reviewed by the Post. And the projected cost of the East Wing construction alone was $600 million, with half of that coming from taxpayers. Remember, Trump initially said that the cost would be $200 million. What a bargain. And all that money would come from private donations. The Post notes that the money for these construction projects is being routed through a small White House office, which typically holds just a few $1 million and handles smaller upkeep type projects. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Julie Roginski, Democratic strategist and author of the Salty Politics newsletter on Substack, and Tim O'Brien, senior executive editor at Bloomberg Opinion and MS Now political analyst. So, Tim, the common denominator of so many of these Trump vanity projects is this sidestepping of Congress and hiding of specific details like scope and cost and where the money is coming from. And the ballroom, in many ways, seems to be the most egregious of all of these. But my question to you is, which is worse? Having the money come from private companies that he is shaking down, maybe for some kind of quid pro quo, or having the money come from taxpayers who he is bilking and who do not have a say at all in whether they fund this project?
I will dodge having to answer that directly by saying they're both equally bad.
Okay.
And they're bad for different reasons. And on the one hand, you've got Congress, which constitutionally is meant to retain the power of the purse. And so many times in this administration, a Republican-controlled Congress has simply allowed the president to run circles around them. And it's not just a matter of prerogative or power. It's about making sure money isn't improperly appropriated or improperly allocated, and that American taxpayers know what is being done with their hard-earned wages that have been turned into tax payments to the federal government. It's particularly peculiar, troubling, and bad that a Republican administration is doing this when historically Republicans have inveighed against the misuse of tax dollars and big government. So that's problematic. Secondly, it is problematic that taxpayers have to foot what is essentially a gargantuan vanity project that's being routed in a very nebulous and opaque way by design, I believe.
Examination available in the American system. The consequences of that examination are still unfolding. The institutional significance cannot be overstated. When the Supreme Court engages directly with allegations that touch the transfer of power, it reaffirms that no individual stands entirely outside the reach of legal process. The hearing did not resolve every factual dispute. It did, however, make clear that those disputes remain subject to formal scrutiny. That clarity itself constitutes a form of accountability. In the days that follow, the political reaction will intensify. Supporters will denounce the proceedings as biased. Critics will demand further investigation. The court will continue its deliberative work. Through it all, the central fact remains. A Supreme Court hearing placed bombshell election interference claims at the center of national attention and left Donald Trump under direct and sustained fire. The record is fixed. The questions have been asked. The institutional process continues. Further layers of the argument focused on the role of outside actors and the degree of coordination with official channels. Counsel pointed to communications that appeared to align private pressure campaigns with public statements issued from official platforms. They asked the court to consider whether that alignment
administration of elections, but also pose extraordinary threats to our democracy. Voters would likely be disenfranchised as officials inevitably make mistakes in rushing to formulate new voter lists and roll out untested technologies to scan ballots for eligibility determinations. Today on All Rise News and Legal AF, we're going to bring on the show a former Attorney General for the state of New Jersey, Matt Platkin, who's representing a coalition of 56 former judges, both state and federal, and dominated by Republican appointees, by governors and former presidents, who are challenging this executive order and calling attention to the danger that this has on the upcoming midterm election. Today, we're also going to focus on the strategy that the Trump administration is pushing in order to make sure there is no appropriate time to oppose this measure. Take a moment to subscribe, and we're going to welcome onto the show Matt Platkin. Welcome back, Matt. I'm going to start with just a kind of big picture question. Do you believe that this Supreme Court decision will be the most significant one to hit the shadow docket on the midterm elections?
Very likely, yes. Certainly, this administration and this Supreme Court has taken use of the shadow docket at unprecedented pace. And we obviously, when I was in office, we litigated the birthright citizenship case the first time around on the shadow docket. So who knows what could come between now and early November, but certainly this is an enormously important case that they're deciding on a very fast timeline. And it really, the issues right now before the court, as with birthright, are quite technical. But the broader issue, Adam, is about whether or not the federal government, without any congressional action and any legal authority, is going to be allowed to interfere and inject itself in how states run their elections in a way that contradicts the Constitution.
Let's get into those technical matters in a moment, because the devil's in the details, but I want to get into the nuts and bolts of what this executive order does. If Trump wins, what does this executive order do? If I'm looking at, for example, the state's legal brief, they call it an unprecedented, legally indefensible voter verification and ballot interception program. It requires state governments to assemble lists of voters registered to cast ballots. Tell me all the things this executive order purports to do.
Well, it does a number of things. You just laid out some of the most concerning. For one, it directs the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies to compile lists of individuals that are U.S. citizens who will be 18 or older at the time of the upcoming election. An extraordinary step. It requires them to transmit those lists to state election officials. It orders the Attorney General to take certain investigative steps. Perhaps most alarmingly, it completely upends the system of mail-in voting. It requires the Postmaster General to make rules with respect to how what kind of envelopes can be used, the barcodes on those envelopes, what individuals can have to be on a list to mail those envelopes, and there's a whole bunch of other enforcement steps that are included here. So, needless to say, I think everyone agrees that taking steps to ensure the integrity of our elections are critically important. I wish this administration had done that when they tried to overthrow the 2020 election, but we'll put that aside for a minute. But in order for the federal government, particularly for the president, to act in a way that interferes with how states administer elections, they need congressional authorization. That's plain as day in the Constitution. They have made no attempt. Once they lost at the district court level, and I know we'll get into this, they are not even attempting to justify the substantive merits of this executive order, the legal authority that the president purportedly acted upon to issue this order. They are simply saying, let it go into effect and let the appeal sort of play out on its normal course, all the while it's disrupting maybe the most consequential midterm election in American history.
So let's dive into that. You had mentioned that John Sauer, who's
demonstrated a level of organization that the law treats as distinct from ordinary political speech. Trump's team rejected the characterization, insisting that political allies routinely communicate and that no criminal or constitutional line had been crossed. The justices pressed for a clearer account of where the line actually lay. The institutional stakes remained high throughout. Election administration depends on the assumption that certified results will be respected once legal challenges have run their course. When that assumption is tested by sustained efforts to reopen closed processes, the system requires clear legal boundaries. The hearing placed those boundaries under direct examination. The questions from the bench made clear that the court was not prepared to treat the entire post-election period as immune from scrutiny. As the arguments continued, the unresolved tensions became more visible. The justices had not signaled an immediate ruling. They had, however, made plain that the factual record and the legal theories surrounding the interference claims would receive careful attention. The public had watched the exchange in real time. The transcript would become part of the permanent institutional record. Portions of the questioning were already being analyzed by lawyers and commentators tracking
the scenes. That investigation is never done in the way that the FBI thought it should be done when they opened it in May of 2017. And if you went back to 2017 or 2018 and you told the average American that Robert Mueller's investigation is not really looking at Trump's personal history and ties to Russia, it's exclusively focused on whether crimes were committed, I think people would be surprised that the Mueller investigation never took a true deep dive at Trump's own ties to Russia outside of the 2016 campaign.
Do you think Trump is under the notion that this investigation into him is happening, that that's why he's such a lunatic about it 10 years later?
I don't know. I mean, look, you have to remember, after Mueller is appointed in May or June or July of 17, I interviewed Trump in the Oval Office, and Maggie Haberman asked him whether Mueller would be crossing a red line if he looked at his finances. And he said, yes, he would be. And what the FBI wanted to do, one person once described to me at some point in the past decade, was a Manhattan Project style investigation into Trump's finances to understand where Trump had gotten his money from. Now, there are people on both ends of the political spectrum who will have varying different views of that. Some people, some strong Article 2 people that would think that the executive branch can't do an investigation like that because the president sets what the national security threats are. So how can you investigate whether the president is a national security threat? So like the idea of the counterintelligence investigation is a extraordinary one and one that can be easily debated. But at the end of the day, Trump did make clear that he didn't want his finances looked at. And that Manhattan Project style financial investigation into Trump's ties to Russia, based on everything we know today, a decade later, never happened.
Director Brennan, you're gone, right, before this decision is made. This happens after Trump fires Comey. But Trump is still intent on investigating you. That's what the Southern District of Florida is looking at, for simply assessing that either wittingly or unwittingly, there were shared priorities, if you will, looking at Hillary Clinton's emails and otherwise. What do you make of the fact that last week they dumped memos that show something very different than what they seem to think they show? Why this obsession, in your view?
Well, I think once something gets into Donald Trump's head, he can't get rid of it, particularly when he is so insecure and is so sensitive about any type of perceived, chink in his armor that the Russians had helped him get elected back in 2016. So it's unsurprising that he continues to pull at this, and also it's part of his way to retaliate against individuals that he thinks wronged him. But I must say, John Solomon, he has raised buffoonery to a never before seen level in terms of what it is that he says and pushes out as far as these conspiracy theories are concerned. But like Mike, I do believe that there are a number of threads on the financial front and the counterintelligence front.
The broader implications for future election disputes. The aftermath will unfold across multiple fronts. Additional briefing will address the precise standards that apply. Political actors will continue to frame the hearing according to their existing narratives. Yet the core reality cannot be rewritten. A Supreme Court hearing examined Bombshell claims of election interference in open. As the arguments continued, the unresolved tensions became more visible. The justices had not signaled an immediate ruling. They had, however, made plain that the factual record and the legal theories surrounding the interference claims would receive careful attention. The public had watched the exchange in real time. The transcript would become part of the permanent institutional record. Portions of the questioning were already being analyzed by lawyers and commentators, tracking the broader implications for future election disputes. The aftermath will unfold across multiple fronts. Additional briefing will address the precise standards that apply. Political actors will continue to frame the hearing according to their existing narratives. Yet the core reality cannot be rewritten. A Supreme Court hearing examined bombshell claims of election interference in open...
If Donald Trump has the right to tell him whatever he wants to do. So this then becomes this like Escher, this Escher picture, this cycle of life in which Trump claims that Blanche has autonomy, but Blanche's entire philosophy is predicated on what Trump says. So the question is, what did we go through over the last 2 to 3 weeks? What has been achieved by these 3 senators who held out briefly? At the moment, based on the way that Trump was talking, I would say the jury's very much out.
Speaking of juries and judges, I wonder what you think will be Todd Blanche's line in terms of obeying judges. I mean, on the immunity deal, it's a judge that has said that it's unlawful. You can't be, you can't represent both sides. It's not a settlement if you are on both sides of it.
Well, I think Blanche has been all over the map on this thing, and the general tenor said during the administration started off in the first couple of weeks when then Chief of Staff Chad Mizell walked into the press room at the Department of Justice and handed us this extraordinary attack on a federal judge who was defying the administration. Blanche himself has been called out in the Obregón Garcia case of not obeying judges. There is an entire practice here of demonizing judges that don't agree with Donald Trump. Now, Blanche has, I think, his red line is legality. But in Blanche's interactions with senators, both publicly and privately, that was what he established as the line of legality. And I think one of the really interesting takeaways from the confirmation process is that every time that Todd Blanche was asked if Trump was doing something that was right, his response was Trump had the right to do it. And if you saw, for instance, President Obama's recent interview, Obama says clearly, I could have done all kinds of things as president to instruct Eric Holder and the other attorney generals to do whatever I wanted them to do. I chose not to do that. So there's an acknowledgement that on the part of Obama and other critics of Blanche and Trump, that it's not so much that you have the right to do a lot of things when you're president. It is the restraint that one shows and the respect for norms and the rule of law that has always been assumed in previous attorneys general that one can no longer assume with regard to Blanche.
Margaret Donovan, I want to ask you about the legacy that he assumes the mantle with. Under his leadership of the department, since he became Deputy Attorney General, more than 16,000 DOJ employees have left the department, including a quarter of its attorneys. He's overseen the termination of hundreds of employees, including agents, attorneys, and professional staff that worked on the January 6 cases and the Mar-a-Lago investigation. He is leading a department that is, as Glenn said, isn't trying to do the right thing. The only line he drew for himself is that he hadn't done the illegal thing. I wonder your thoughts on what that means for the men and women still inside the Department of Justice and the FBI.
No, I think the combination of former Attorney General Bondi's decisions and now Attorney General Blanche's decisions, I think it will be a legacy.
Ordinary political debate cannot easily extinguish. The institutional significance remains clear. When the Supreme Court engages directly with allegations that touch the peaceful transfer of power, it reaffirms that the system retains mechanisms for examining even the most charged claims. The hearing did not settle every factual dispute. It did, however, establish that those disputes remain subject to formal process. That establishment itself constitutes a form of accountability that political rhetoric alone cannot provide. In the days and weeks ahead, the political reaction will intensify. Supporters will denounce the proceedings, critics will demand further action. The court will deliberate according to its own institutional norms. Through it all, the central fact of the hearing stands. Bombshell election interference claims were placed before the Supreme Court, examined in public, and left Donald Trump under direct and sustained pressure. The record is permanent. The questions remain part of the transcript. The institutional process moves forward,